Well, I think AI is changing the game dramatically. In the past, the only way that you'll get experience is by actually doing it. But now you can have a conversation with AI about every situation that you're in. I think the big question is, do you want to trust ChatGPT with your financial data? Right? Everyone will have their own different opinions of it. But the reality is that the banks and the trading platforms, they're regulated.
Yeah.
They have a fiduciary duty to you as the customer. Our goal is really to bring this technology at scale to as many people as possible. And we felt that working hand in hand in a co-creation model with a big financial institution was probably the best way to do that. We call ourselves AI native, not just because of the platform, but also because of the way that we operate. So we try to embed AI into almost everything that we do to give us like that multiplier effect, right? So instead of one person, we can do 10 people's work. So we did write a manifesto very early on in terms of what were some of the guiding principles of how we would use AI. It's a very short manifesto, it's only 6 points. The first was, we want to be AI native. So we want to embed that into everything that we do. 7 billion people interacting with this model. There were 7 billion permutations of how you could use this model for different things, that maybe you're the person to crack an idea that nobody else has thought of, not even the model itself.
Hi guys, welcome back to the CTO show hosted by Tech Vibe. I'm your host today, Philip, and today I'm here with Michael, who's the founder and CEO of Nextvestment. Michael is also an established practitioner across technology, financial services, and AI in Singapore. So Michael, really glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much, man.
Well, Michael, I think one of the first things I want to start with is that you have quite an interesting career. Because, when I talk to a lot of people, usually they go down the corporate path or down the startup path. And you kind of have gone through both and through multiple times. So we'd love to learn a little bit more about your previous career.
Yeah, I've been in and out of enterprises and startups. I took a very unorthodox path. When I came out of the army, I just decided to start my own business. And it really stemmed from the idea that I wasn't really ready to work for someone else. I had my own ideas, my own sort of thinking. And I did that for 5 years. Had a pretty decent business. We dabbled with a few different things. But a mentor mindset is that, look, whatever you're doing, it's small and medium enterprises. It's good. But if you really want to do something bigger, you need like corporate experience, right? So he recommended that think about like working for a big bank or big MNC. And it just so happened that during that same point in time, another good friend of mine had said that DBS was looking to hire developers through a hackathon, right? So I thought, oh, interesting. Let's go down. Let's give it a shot. See where I stand. And the night before the hackathon, I was working very late until about 3:00 in the morning. I just decided that, look, I'm not gonna go the next day. I'm too tired for this. So I go to bed, 8 a.m. in the morning, right? Yeah. My phone starts vibrating, right? And the happiest and chirpiest HR person is on the other line, Hi, Michael, this is Juno from DBS. Are you joining us today? And I just felt so bad in that moment. I said, yeah, I'm on my way. I'm gonna to head down. Went for the hackathon, really enjoyed it. It was a 48-hour hackathon. Met a whole bunch of good people. And thankfully we won the hackathon. And they offered me a job on the spot. So I was, when I saw that, I was like, let's go and try that. And then there was 5 years of corporate experience. I had the benefit of being rotated through multiple departments. I saw a lot of consumer banking, a lot of, how you manage like your deposits, your loans, your wealth, your bank assurance, your the digital banking. And towards the end of that, I was like, look, 5 years in a big corporate bank is very comfortable. Yeah. Pay you a very good salary, very good benefits, 1% housing loan,
Wow.
which is fantastic. But I figured is that I didn't want my career to end there. Right? Yeah. I wanted to have something that was further than that. I didn't see myself as a lifer, as they would call it. So I decided, let's go back to startups. But instead of doing the scrappy startups, let's see if we can find a scale up, right? So I was looking to go from like a Series A to a Series C. And at that point in time, Temasek, the big sovereign wealth fund in Singapore, was looking at investing in big ideas. Right? And I joined a startup called Affinity, working on very cutting edge blockchain technology, digital identity. Did some of the best engineering work that I've ever done there. But the vision of the company, it was challenging to navigate that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, one of my ex-bosses moved to Sing Life. And Sing Life was at a stage where they were a startup growing to about 70,000, 80,000 customers, reached sort of a glass ceiling, and they were looking at how they could grow further. And they bought Aviva Singapore, right, which had 1 million customers at the time. So when you go from 70,000 customers to 1 million customers, you need a very different, thought process and operating procedures. So they asked me over, and I had a blast of a time there, 2.5 years at Sing Life, sort of experimenting of like how do you take the startup mindset but also apply it to such a large customer base. And then a little over a year ago, I saw this generative AI wave come out, and I was just thinking that, hey, this is something that looks quite legitimate, right? And I had these ideas, and I was itching to get back into, the very hands-on mode, moving past sort of the management aspect. And that's when I decided it's about time. It's been another 5 years, right, where it's time for me to go and start my own thing. Wow. And this is where we've ended up.
That's amazing. I would love to learn more about your company, Nextvestment, but I think before we do that, I would love to dive a little bit deeper into maybe each of the individual choices that you made in your career. I'm just curious, were there underlying principles by which you decided to move from one job to another? Or, was it just luck? Or how did you actually end up doing these? Yeah.
So I don't think it was very deliberate, but I did think about it in like 5-year blocks, right? Like the first 5 years was really formative, like allow me the autonomy to go and explore my own things. The next 5 years was really about, seeing how big organizations work and how do I fit into that as a cog in that big machine. And the last final 5 years was really like, how do I take those principles and sort of grow, from a small company to a larger company. I don't think it was actually a lot of luck. I was just in the right place at the right time. But I think what I did was I put myself in those places, right? That if the opportunity did present itself, then I would go for it. And case in point is like the opportunity with Sing Life was because I had been at DBS and because I had had the opportunity to rotate through so many different departments. I met so many different people, and I had been given the opportunity to showcase myself and my skills and my personality.
So I guess, if you had to give advice maybe to those who are younger in their career about putting themselves in the right positions to take advantage of these opportunities, like what would you say? Or, looking back, were there any things that you would encourage these kind of younger career professionals to do?
So I think, when I was in my younger days, sometimes you're intern, sometimes you'll sit inside a meeting with all these big heads of departments and whatnot, and you're always just sort of like the guy sitting in the back and like, let me go get you some coffee and just keep quiet and stuff like that. I would actually say that the newer generation, I've had quite a lot of interns, I've had the opportunity to have a lot of interns over the years. They're very different from our generation. They're not afraid to speak up and sometimes ask the silly or the stupid question, right? Because what they're doing is that they're my hypothesis is that they've grown up with social media, they've grown up with the idea of being comfortable to share their thoughts, share their opinions, right? Whereas, in our generation, it was a bit like, you just keep quiet and all that. So I would just say to them is like, continue doing that because, asking those questions at that age is the perfect age to ask it, right? And putting yourselves into those positions where you have that visibility where that people know that you're in the room, I think that's going to be very beneficial for your career. The only thing I'll add to that is that I think COVID has shortchanged a lot of the next generation because, as they were growing up in their formative years, first joining the workforce, a lot of it turned into work from home, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. And what that doesn't allow them is they can't sit in the room and with people, understand the social cues, the emotions, the small little things that actually matter in the workplace. And I do see that coming through. And hopefully there's no like long-term ramifications of that.
Got it. I'm also curious, maybe as you now are transitioning towards entrepreneurship and working for a big company, a lot of what you said before was maybe getting the requisite experience and skills, right? So that you're prepared for the next role. So maybe for young people who are maybe a little bit hesitant to take that leap of faith to work for a startup or do their own thing, like what would you say to them? Would you say that it's better to actually work for corporate first like you did? Or, what is the advice that you would say now?
Well, I think AI is changing the game dramatically. In the past, the only way that you'll get experience is by actually doing it.
Yeah.
But now you can have a conversation with AI about every situation that you're in.
Yeah.
I was with a young friend of mine who was maybe 21, 22 years old, starting out at a big corporate environment, and she was telling me that for every single interaction that she has with senior leadership, team members, stakeholders, she has a ChatGPT thread,
Wow.
right? And she will ask like, "Hey, how do I handle this situation?" So that's brilliant, right? That's a brilliant way to use it and to learn at an exponential pace. Because for us, we will learn through imitation. We learn through like, oh, I seen this person gets quoted this way, whereas they have like an always on mentor at this point. So I think what applied to us may not necessarily apply to them, because the enterprise organizations are also learning to grapple with how the world is changing, right? So I think it's a level playing field at this point in time. I think the most important thing is to do something, right, and not just wait around for things to happen.
Got it. So the spirit of seizing opportunities still applies, but maybe the tools are a little bit different.
Exactly.
So speaking about seizing opportunities, now obviously you're doing your own company. I would love to hear a little bit more about what you guys do, and tell me a little more about it.
So we're the team from Nextvestment.
Yes.
We call ourselves the AI native wealth management platform. What that really means is that we're ChatGPT for finance, right? And we're designed to sit within a bank or a trading apps like web application or mobile app. And the whole idea was really stemmed from the genesis of why is it so difficult to invest? Why is it so difficult to get access to good financial advice, right? And I think for the vast majority of people, they've got a bit of money, $100,000 to $1 million, right? But that's not enough for the private bankers or the senior relationship managers to service them. It's not that the banks don't want to service these guys, but it costs a lot of money, right? So the idea was that if you really look at generative AI, what it's really good at its core is taking complex topics and speaking your language, right? Helping you understand. And I really felt, about a year ago, I was like, hey, this is something that could really apply to financial advice, right? To help people not just understand, but also stay disciplined, right, with their finances. And we started off with a prototype, showed it to a couple of people. They all said, hey, this is something that I would use. I really like it. And eventually that turned into a full-fledged company. And we've gotten clients within Singapore and the region, deployed it within regulated institutions. And we're seeing great demand. We're seeing great usage of the tool in many ways that we also didn't expect.
Right. So just make it more explicit. So let's say I'm a customer of Bank ABC, right? How would I actually interact with Nextvestment, and what are the interactions or what are the suggestions that you guys would actually give me?
So I think the basic genesis, if you think about a customer's journey to start investing, often it's very anecdotal. They hear about something on the news, they'll be talking with their friends over coffee that, hey, you should look at this company, there might be some upside, right? And if you think about the journey today to go and do the due diligence on that, you have to go to this website, you have to read this news report. So the whole idea was, could you just ask this a simple question, right? Should I buy this stock, right? Now that's a very nuanced question, and we've stayed very clear of giving you a direct recommendation.
I see.
But instead what we do is we say like, look, this is the financial metrics that they have. This is the historical stock prices. These are the technical indicators, right? The RSI, the EMAs, and this is the market sentiment, right? And we summarize that and give you enough information for you to make your own informed decision, right? So you don't have to flip through like 20 different like pages or articles or whatnot.
I see.
But the context of that question is very nuanced, because should you buy something, it really depends on what's in your portfolio as well, right? If you ask me, should I buy Intel, if you're already a heavyweight on AMD or Nvidia, then probably not, right? But if you don't have exposure to that, then you should. So this is where we think that the next generation of financial advice will come in, where you can ask these questions at your own leisure, right? Like coffee, just before you sleep, on the train, it's non-obligatory.
Yeah.
If you talk to a human advisor, sometimes face to face, you feel at the end of it like, hey, I need to buy something from them, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it gives a lot of data to the financial institution to decide what to do next with you,
I
right?
see.
So you can imagine now is that instead of a financial advisor cold calling you and saying, hey, do you want to buy this mutual fund? They can say that it's like, hey, I saw that you're interested in semiconductor stocks, right?
Yes.
Would you be interested in this ETF? Gives you a diversified exposure to US as well as Taiwanese semiconductors, right? And it doesn't come with these fees. And then the value add for the customer, the value add, the cost efficiency for the financial institution, it's a win-win on both sides.
That's incredible because you're doing something that these human financial advisors could not do, right? Which is passing all the customer insights and information back to the bank or whatever financial authority. Exactly. And basically knowing exactly what the user actually wants, right?
Precisely.
And do you guys only cover, is it more like listed Singaporean or whatever equities, or do you cover, private equity or other asset classes, or?
Well, this is why we went down a B2B route rather than B2C, because public equity is probably the easier bit to do. So we cover US equity, Singapore equity, Hong Kong equity. We're adding Japan equity, India equity, as well as Malaysia equity soon. But really the value add is being able to allow the financial institution to put their own products, right? Their own mutual funds, their own structured products into the platform. Because that's really where the benefit is. You don't want people to necessarily be individual stock picking, because actually that's not ideal financial advice.
I see. And this is better than ChatGPT because I guess, I couldn't actually upload my own products on ChatGPT for my customers to find it, right?
Exactly. And I mean, with ChatGPT, you have the challenge that it's not real time. You don't have access to real time data.
I see.
It's a generalist model. So we use a technology called a vector store database, right? Retrieval augmented generation, where we have a data pipeline that pulls in data into this database. So whenever you ask a question, it's gonna query based off that database, and if it doesn't know, it's gonna say I don't know. It's not gonna make something up, which is always the danger with ChatGPT, because it's more of a generalist sort of setup. But most importantly is that I think the big question is, do you want to trust ChatGPT with your financial data, right? Everyone will have their own different opinions of it, but the reality is that the banks and the trading platforms, they're regulated.
Yeah.
They have a fiduciary duty to you as the customer, right? And if something goes wrong, right, you have insurance, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got SDIC in Singapore, FDIC in the US, so you're protected to a certain degree. You don't have that protection with ChatGPT.
I see. Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you guys deal with maybe hallucinations? Because that's always a risk of even ingesting, let's say, like RAG databases or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time on that. So we've done a fine tuning on a model where we put through about 500,000, 500,000 questions. We've realized that the way that people ask questions is also very different, right? Like some people will ask, should I buy? Some people will ask, compare the risks between this and that. So we've had to spend a lot of time to really get into the nuance of it, and you'll be surprised at how difficult this is, because if you look at US equity, that's pretty straightforward. Apple is AAPL, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at Hong Kong equity, right, Alibaba is 8899, right?
Wow.
So that translation between the two, it's stuff that a lot of people don't realize, that there's a lot of underlying plumbing and infrastructure that needs to go into it.
Got it. And I'm curious, like after you have launched this company, right, have you seen maybe the way that people think about financial advisors as a whole? Like, has that customer behavior changed, right? Do they still go to their maybe financial advisor for advice, or do they now just maybe rely on your solution and they just make that advice independently? Like, what is that workflow now that consumers actually decide to use?
I think we're still at a very early stage. I would actually say is that today, at least in this part of the world, most customers will not go to their financial advisor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because unfortunately there is a bad rep with a lot of the the industry. And there are very good ones out there, don't get me wrong.
Right.
Most advisors will just push your product, right? And the challenge of that is that they're under pressure by their sales team or their leaders to generate revenue. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But they have quarterly KPIs to hit and quotas. The good advisors will push a product that makes sense for you, something that fits your profile and whatnot. But really, the great advisors, I don't even like calling them financial advisors. I look at them more like life coaches, right? And the whole idea of a financial advisor is really to help you think about all the things in your life that you haven't thought about, right?
Yeah.
Like retirement planning or estate planning, or if you're in the US, tax management, right?
Yes.
Buying a house, having a kid. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And a lot of people don't go through life and they think about it after the fact, right? So some of the best financial advisors I've seen, I look at them more like performance coaches rather than just financial advisors.
And I'm curious, do you think ChatGPT or AI will play that role in the future as well?
Well, never say never. I think it's a very big debate because you're starting to see a lot of people use ChatGPT for therapy, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's very emotional. It's more emotional than some humans. But I think there's nuance with the human connection, right? And sometimes with very sensitive topics like, hey, I need to think about how I'm going to distribute my wealth to my children, right?
Yeah.
20 years in the future, 30 years in the future. That's not a conversation that you necessarily want to have with a robot. You want to have something, a trusted friend,
Yes.
ideally. But we're living in the sci-fi world,
Yeah.
right? Things are changing on a daily basis. To be honest with you, I think there will be people that will want to use ChatGPT or an equivalent because they trust that more. But I think there will still be a vast majority of people who still want to retain that human connection and that human element.
Got it. And I'm curious because, these kind of solutions like RAG, yeah, I'm guessing there's a lot of competitors doing something like this as well, maybe even targeting banks or similar types of customers. For you guys, what do you think is that unique insight, right? Or is there a unique way that you guys are tackling the problem that,
So we're thinking very much about long-term context and long-term memory. Financial advice, or it's not a one-time transactional thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, the basis of where you were in your life 5 years ago versus now versus 5 years in the future is going to be very different, right?
Yeah.
And a conversation that you might have had a year ago, how does that influence today, and how does that influence tomorrow as well? So the question is for us is like, how can we bring that into this sort of co-pilot experience where we know that, hey, you were interested in this before.
Yeah.
Did you follow up on it, right? And what should we do next, basically? But that's really where we think that the human element comes in, right? Because we don't think AI should necessarily be dictating or directing your life, right? You should be in control of that, but you should get enough advice for you to make that informed decision, right? You should be able to get the advice where, hey, these are the pros of doing this and this is the cons of doing it as well. And that's what really, financial advisors or any form of advisors are really sort of doing. They're not telling you exactly what to do, but they're giving you like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that?
So it sounds like it's a future whereby these financial advisors will have this tool in conjunction, working together to serve the customer, which can store long-term memory, but also has the human interface, right? To actually better serve the customer. I guess when you look at the financial advisory industry as a whole, does that mean that maybe there's less financial advisors because now maybe one person can handle multiple clients at once? Or what do you think that future outlook looks like? Yeah.
So we were very deliberate with the segment that we were going after, and we think that if we succeed, we'll see the same amount of advisors that we have today. And the reason for that is because we're going after a segment that is traditionally underserved, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the largest banks in Southeast Asia, they have 700 wealth planning managers, right? 3 million customers.
Wow.
Right? So that's one WPM, right, to 4,000 odd, customers.
Wow.
You think about how many conversations you can have in a day, maybe 2 or 3,
Yeah.
like real conversations. Over the course of a month, that's 60, right?
Yeah.
Which means that realistically, they're not able to cover everybody, right? And if you actually ask them how they sort, The reality is they're just right-clicking, sorting by how much money you have, right? Which, that's the fact of life.
Yeah.
So we think that this is going to help to democratize that advice,
That's
right?
really-
Where people are able at their own leisure, their own free time, go in, ask these questions that they want. And at the right time, right, we surface this to the financial advisor to come in for the most strategic conversations, right? The conversations that actually matter. Asking a financial advisor, should I buy this stock? It's not a value add to either party, right? But the value add is really thinking about, hey, I know that you're interested in this, right? I know you want to buy this stock. Let's look at your entire portfolio, right? Are you balanced? Do you have too much risk with equity? Maybe
Yeah.
do you need some fixed income? Do you need alternatives? Do you need some crypto, for example?
Makes sense. I think one of the other really interesting things about your company that I noticed is that you're doing B2B sales, right? And I think in Southeast Asia, it's actually very, very rare that I would see a company try to tackle that segment, especially B2B on the enterprise side instead of SMEs. So what's that experience been like for you? I'm just curious. Yeah.
We were very deliberate with choosing B2B to start with. A few reasons for that. One, we wanted to have a profitable business. B2C is a challenging space to operate in. The customer acquisition costs are very high. Within Southeast Asia, you have quite a fragmented market, right? Every country has its own nuance, its own languages, and whatnot. But there's also a cultural thing that we think. In Southeast Asia and in Asia in general, we actually tend to gravitate to larger institutions, right? Where we put a lot of trust into the big banks and believe that they are in some way safer.
Yeah.
This is a counterpose to juxtaposed to the US, where a lot of the Americans don't trust the big financial institutions, right? They do like the plucky little underdog. And you don't see that happening in Asia. And I think that might be a cultural thing. Not right, not wrong, but we were just very aware of the realities of what customers wanted, right?
Yeah.
And for us, the idea of trying to compete with, a big bank, our goal is really to bring this technology at scale to as many people as possible. And we felt that working hand in hand in a co-creation model with a big financial institution was probably the best way to do that.
Some of the other entrepreneurs, when I talk to them, they say that obviously doing B2B sales in Southeast Asia is quite different, especially if you're tackling multiple markets and stuff, right? So I'm just curious if maybe you have advice for some other entrepreneurs who are also in that same problem or same seat, or how have you been able to kind of overcome that?
That's a great question. I mean, so I can talk about financial institutions in particular and the differences between the West as well as the East. I've seen a lot of American and European companies come over to Asia trying to sell their products. But there is a fundamental difference between how we think about finance versus how the West thinks about finance. We do have I do feel that the institutions here have a higher sense of accountability to their customers, right? There are a lot more checks and balances within the systems that you not normally see in a Western system. I'll give you a good example. Citibank accidentally sent like $900 million to a customer by accident, right? And that's because they've got no approval workflows, right? There's no one checking, basically. In Asia, we have this process called a maker checker, right? Which if you talk to Americans, they were like, what is that, right? And the whole idea is that someone's going to create it, but someone's going to check it.
Right.
And I think that gives us a sense of stability and assuredness to our customers that hey, things are, your money is safe with us, right? And you see this across the board. It extends not just with the big banks in Southeast Asia, but you also see it in Islamic banking, which is very unique to this part of the world. So because of that, when a lot of customers or companies come over to Southeast Asia and they try to sell, the mindset is always about profitability, right? Like, how can I drive as much revenue? But there is still that fiduciary duty, right? That responsibility to those customers that a lot of the financial institutions are looking at. So governance, compliance, the accountability, the auditability, those are very important features that a lot of these companies don't even consider at that stage. They're just thinking that, hey, it's just purely about making revenue. But I think our approach is slightly different in this part of the world.
What does the B2B sales process look like in Southeast Asia?
complicated and a mess.
Yeah.
I think there's no hard and fast rule. You need to identify who are the decision makers, the influencers within the organization. You need to be able to capture their attention, capture their imagination. Financial institutions, I actually argue is that you don't want a financial institution to be too revolutionary, right? You want them to be stable,
Yeah.
right? And if you look at banks, the biggest banks in the world, they've been around hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
You don't want them to be experimenting too much with that. But you also want them to have that ambition to make customer lives better. So for us in particular, we like working with sort of that sweet spot where they have the ambition to grow, right? But they're not so big that they're crushed by their own weight, right? And figuring out how to navigate the different stakeholders is a lot of art and science. But there are very clear things that you will need to, at the very minimum, be able to understand that, hey, they're going to care about your info security, your compliance, your auditability, the way that your pricing is set up, the longevity of your company.
Wow.
So B2B sales is very difficult, but going back to sort of my background, the benefit of working in a big organization now has taught me how to navigate those and identify actually really what matters to these people.
I see. So the sales cycles also must be pretty long as well.
The sales cycles are very long. We've been lucky that we've worked with some partners who have moved very fast on it. But again, when you need to think that the sales cycles could be anywhere from 12 to 18 months. But when they buy into it, right, they're buying in for 5 to 10 years, right? There are technologies at some of the banks that have been there that have been are older than I am. So again, banks they're built for longevity, right? They're some of the oldest companies in the world, and the mindset that they take is very different from the mindset that you see like in a technology company, right, or a pharmaceutical company, right? They're thinking about, look, I'm not thinking about the next year. I'm thinking 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And when you start thinking on those timescales, right, the way that you make decisions is very different from the norm.
Of course.
This episode is brought to you by TechVibe, your one-stop IT recruitment solution provider. We connect global companies with top tech talent across Southeast Asia. Whether you're looking for permanent hires, short-term contractors, or employer of record, EOR services, we've got you covered, especially in the IT and digital sectors. Thanks for tuning in. And now, enjoy the episode.
Sounds like you guys have to build a lot of product, right? On the security side, sounds like you have to navigate an entire sales process. So I would assume that your team must be quite big. Is that true?
It depends on what you consider big. So we're only we're a 3-man team.
That's insane.
And a lot of people do say that.
Yeah.
We have benefited from our experience. So it's a very experienced team who has seen a lot of different technology, a lot of different business styles, a lot of different marketing styles. And because of that experience, we are in the unique position to use and maximize the usage of AI. Right? So we call ourselves AI native, not just because of the platform, but also because of our the way that we operate. So we try to embed AI into almost everything that we do to give us like that multiplier effect, right? So instead of one person, we can do 10 people's work.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what are some of these, maybe AI tools or workflows that you guys have?
So we're a big fan of Cursor. I think that's really changed the game. We tried quite a few at the very beginning, but Cursor has really been a game changer, and 90% of the code has been written by that tool. Having said that, I'm very against the idea of vibe coding. I have my own personal take on it. I'm a seasoned programmer, right?
Yeah.
So I, when we allow the models to write code, we're very deliberate with checking every line, reviewing every line of code that it's writing, and directing it in the way that, hey, this is how I want it to be architected. I think the challenge that a lot of these vibe coders are facing is that as they grow to a certain size, the models They don't do so well with the context, with the length of the code, and they don't have
Refactoring.
the refactoring, right? They don't have the basis, they don't have the knowledge of knowing what a good design looks like. So we've been very cautious to use it because we recognize that if you get something wrong, it could really mess up your entire code base. Having said that, we are big lovers of what they're doing, right? And it's really helped us to scale at quite an exponential pace.
What advice would you say to other maybe entrepreneurs or even in financial services? Usually that industry is, very famous for being very slow in adopting technologies. Like what advice do you have for them when they, think about incorporating AI, maybe even in their workflows, right? Any thoughts?
So I was in Japan a couple of months ago, and I was listening to the chairman of the FSA, which is their version of MES or the Fed or the SEC in the US, and he had a slide on AI, and it only had like one piece of text in red, and he repeated this twice in English and once in Japanese, and he said it's the risk of not taking a risk, right? And for the Japanese to say something like that, that's quite a big statement from a regulatory body, right? The challenge right now is that if you don't take that first gamble, right, there's a good chance someone else is going to. And this is not a game of efficiency, right, where you're making things slightly better. This is an exponential game, right? You could really see, a competitor go from a near peer to like an exponential curve in a very short period of time. And you're seeing that with a lot of the AI native companies, right? With, again, Cursor, 100 million in revenue in less than a year. That is insane. Like, never seen that in life. And my theory right now is that everyone's talking about software developers losing their jobs, right?
Yeah.
And the only reason why I think that that's happening is because the software developers understand that domain, right? They know how to automate that. And eventually what's going to happen is that as more software developers lose their jobs, they go off, decide to try and build something, right? And now with all these tools, you're going to see it start percolating to all these other industries.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to try and stay ahead of that and not just wait, because this second mover advantage may not exist anymore.
Wow. The gap will be so big.
The gap will be so big.
I guess, given that, in your previous career, you worked for big corporates, right? And even Singlife, which is a startup, but it's a scale up in a certain extent. And now you have a startup, but you're achieving a lot of really amazing things with a small team, right? So I guess, do you also think that these corporates or these scale ups in the future will look fundamentally different, right? In regards to how you build this type of company or the number of employees that they have?
I think it will look fundamentally different. I think it depends on, you see, there's two ways that big organizations could adopt AI. The first is they can look at it purely from an efficiency point of view, right? And that means cost optimization, which eventually means, cutting people, right? But there is a question is like, hey, could you reskill this workforce, right, to do 10x instead, right? So instead of you keeping your company stagnant, you're now saying that, hey, no, I want to be here instead. And I think you're going to see different approaches to that. But it's really who's brave enough to say that, hey, we're gonna take this gamble. And in the last couple of months, you're starting to see more and more of these, SaaS companies come out and say that, hey, we're going to make this shift from not just using AI, but again, becoming an AI native company. And the question is then, how is that going to how are these incumbents going to react to that, right? While upskilling and reskilling their existing workforce.
It seems like a lot of that conversation is happening in the US, but adoption of AI in Southeast Asia maybe is a little bit slower.
It's non-existent in my opinion. I think in Singapore we're quite advanced. I think we have a good understanding of AI. I think adoption is very laggard compared to the Americans and the Chinese. We recently had an election here, and I was commenting to a couple of friends that we are talking about important things like the cost of living and like our livelihoods and all that, but we're not talking about the future, right? And I don't think enough politicians are talking about how society is going to change with AI, right? And how we're going to adapt to that. I think one of the fundamental things that that I'm worried about is that it's really becoming a race between the Americans and Chinese at this stage, right? And when you talk about, you hear all these safety researchers talking about responsible AI and safe AI, and they talk about how they make it good for humanity. There is a question in my mind: is that what does humanity mean? Does it mean
The Chinese and the Americans.
exactly right? So when I was in Japan, I had the pleasure of speaking to a wide variety of people. I was speaking to a rather large bank who was working with NEC, who is developing their own large language models, right? And I was asking them, is that's a very expensive thing to invest in, right? And why put that kind of capital in? And they sort of insinuated that it's a national strategic risk, right? If you think about the AI models, they're black boxes, right? The people at OpenAI and DeepSeek, they're not very sure what's going on within the models as well, which means that there is an ability to influence, right? There's an ability to change the way that people are using it. So you could imagine, as a individual country, I could be influenced by the biases of this model versus the biases of that model, right? So I do think that not enough of those conversations are happening in Southeast Asia, not enough adoption. We've taken this approach that we're going to be very cautious with our adoption. But I think that the only way that you can be cautious about it is by actually doing it, right? Because otherwise, it's still a very experimental stage, right? And it is changing on a daily basis. And what we think about it today versus tomorrow, it could be very, very different. And by the time that we think about it tomorrow, it could be too late.
For those countries like Singapore or some other countries in Southeast Asia, whereby maybe making your own foundation model doesn't really make so much sense, right? Because it's just so expensive from a CapEx perspective.
Yep.
How do you think, people or organizations or banks or whoever it is in these countries can actually still ride the wave of AI without necessarily, developing at this infrastructure layer?
So I think it's a great question. And, we, as a very small startup, we actually got quite a lot of interest from American banks and credit unions. And I was commenting with my co-founder at the time, is like, this is a bit strange. Usually the Americans are way ahead of us. And right now, where most of the American talent and the Chinese talent, for that matter, is going is to the large language models or to the chips, right? You're not seeing a lot of the talent go to the application layer, right? And I think that's an area that still people can compete in, right? And we can compete in, right? Because what we bring is that we bring our own way of thinking on it. So I think the question is like, how fast are we to adopt these technologies into applications and get people using it, right? Because the faster that we start using it, then we get that exponential effect. We get that 10x on the economy. We get that knowledge, within our society. But it's also about the infrastructure, right? Within Singapore, we have a natural land problem. We're a small country. We don't have enough space for data centers, and more importantly, we don't have the space for power generation. You can see that in the region, a lot of Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand are building data centers like their Pokemon cards, basically. And the compute capacity that's moving into this part of the world is rising exponentially. So you start to see that there is movement within these countries, but I just don't think it's fast enough from an adoption perspective.
Well, hopefully you guys are part of the first wave of companies working on the application layer to help maybe incite some of these changes within Southeast Asia. So that's quite exciting. One of the things that you told me about, which I thought was super unique, is that it seems like you've written an AI manifesto on balancing the role of humans in society as a whole with AI adoption. And I think this is very unique because it seems to me that even in the US, only these big AI research labs like Anthropic or SSI care about AI safety and balancing the role of humans, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about that and maybe why you wrote it and how does that actually manifest?
No, so I'll tell you what's interesting, right? When I look at some of the manifestos from the big large language models, they're very focused on the safety aspect of it, right? They're focused on, let's make sure that this model is not deceptive, it's not lying to us, it's not going to become Terminator and Skynet and take over the world, right? And fair enough, because they're focused really on the foundational aspects of things, right? I think for us, we have a responsibility as the application layer to make sure that it's applied responsibly in society. So we did write a manifesto very early on in terms of what were some of the guiding principles of how we would use AI, right? And it's a very short manifesto. It's only 6 points. The first was, well, we want to be AI native, right? So we want to embed that into everything that we do, but we want to be deliberate. Point two, I've used that word quite a few times, where we're really thinking, why are we using it here? Not just for the sake of using it. And the third is the idea of improve, not replace, right? Whatever we do, it has to be an improvement on the existing process, or it has to have some sort of benefit, and not just replace for the sake of replacing. Right? And the fourth is really, how do you maximize human potential, right? You need to think about designing for the human in the loop, right? Yeah. And where they fit in, because otherwise you're just going to think about optimizing, right? Optimizing the existing process, and optimizing just means there's efficiency gains, right? You don't get that exponential effect, right? You want the AI to handle a lot of the automation, a lot of the mundane stuff, right? And give enough information for the human to sort of be an Iron Man, basically, right? Sure. Where they can do whatever, to receive the maximum potential that they have. And then the fifth and sixth are basically like, making sure that we are secure, right? As well as transparent with our users in terms of why and how this was derived, right? Because that is the fundamentals of trust. So that manifesto has guided us quite well in terms of how we make our decisions, right? There were many ways that we could have just chased purely replacing people. But I think it's important that as we progress, we think about how humans fit into that society, and not just think about, replacing all jobs. And I hear this a lot from a lot of the like Sam Altman would say on many occasions that he thinks that a lot of jobs are going to be replaced. And I don't disagree with him, right? But I do think that we have the opportunity to design for new jobs, right? And you have to think about how you're going to design for it. I'll give the example of horseback riding, right? When the automobile first came out, right, the idea that carriages and all these horsemen are going to be put out of a job, it's true, right? But they had thought about, we're going to get truck drivers, we're going to get cab drivers, we're going to have all these other jobs that are going to be available, and it opened up all these other industries. And I think we have to have that same level of thought when we're applying AI to society.
I guess just to play devil's advocate, in the Industrial Revolution or other technology shifts, there hasn't been a revolution that's so comprehensive, maybe across society, whereby now the incremental amount of upskilling that one would need in order to maybe be productive in a future society is actually just so high, right? So, yeah, have you kind of thought about, how do we reconcile that in that kind of future society, right?
So one of the things that I find quite interesting is that, OpenAI has released this wonderful model to pretty much everyone on the planet, right? But they themselves aren't fully aware of what it can do, right? And I'm amazed by sometimes the human creativity about how to use these models, right? In ways that they probably didn't even think of when they were first designing it, right? I think one of the ones that I thought was quite interesting was the idea of putting yourself and your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend, right, together, and asking ChatGPT to generate what your future kids might look like, right? Which I thought was a very cool thing. My point is that there's 7 billion people on the planet, right? And I think that if 7 billion people could come up with one unique idea, all right, using this model, right, we have so many possibilities of a future that doesn't necessarily need to drive us into this full AI society. I think it's a question of as an individual, right, how am I going to leverage this model to make my life the best that I can, right? And not just sort of lie down and say that, hey, there's nothing that I can do, which I think much of some of the talk out of Silicon Valley is that, well, it's going to replace all jobs, right? Maybe it will. Maybe that's not a problem. Maybe we'll figure out that, hey, there will be a societal shift to universal basic income, or some sort of taxes on these models, and we as humans can do other and explore other ways to express ourselves and contribute to society in other ways that's more than just economic value.
Do you worry that maybe with your company, when you have this manifesto of maybe not directly replacing human talent, but maybe a competitor who maybe is operating in the same space doesn't have those moral qualms, that it will become like a race to a bottom, like the nuclear arms race?
I think that is a concern, and we have had a discussion on this. It's about your principles, I think.
Yeah.
I think for us, we could chase the path of profitability, right? My question then that I often will sometimes derive late at night is, well, if everyone is automated, then frankly you don't need financial advisors either. So
That's fair.
so I think that we've decided to take the gamble, take the bet that humans will still be in the loop, that they'll still value add. I don't think that the AI models will completely take over human connection, right? I have heard about AI boyfriends and AI girlfriends,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's certain chemistry that you have with a human that you can't ever replicate with an AI. The negative emotions that you get with people,
Yeah.
right, is actually a good thing as well, right? And I don't think you hear a lot about GPT 4.1, the latest model, being quite of a yes man,
Yeah.
saying that, oh, you're perfect, you're great, this is the best idea.
But people
ever.
don't like it, actually.
Exactly, right? I mean, people do want to have a bit of conflict, right?
Yeah.
Conflict in movies, it makes it a story more interesting, it makes life more interesting.
The hero's journey, right?
The hero's journey, and everyone needs to have their own personal journey where they have those ups and downs in life. So I don't think that while I would hope that AI doesn't take that away from us, right, there is a chance, but I think that's in our own control to decide what kind of society do we want to live in, right? And fundamentally, where do you put your dollars, basically?
My last question for you is, what can we do to encourage more people in Southeast Asia or in Singapore to start building AI companies, to start using AI, building up the ecosystem here?
It's never been easier to start a company. I think I'm shocked at how when I first did this 15 years ago, it was so hard.
Yeah.
I remember having to file in those big filings of systems, all my paperwork, and now you've got tools for accounting, for legal, for everything. So I think people's mindsets need to be a bit more open to the idea that, hey, like this is something that I can do. One thing that ever since that I've started on this journey is that I've actually had a lot of people come up and talk to me and say that, hey, how do you get started? Because I want to go out and do this myself. And I say, it's like, look, the only way that you're going to be able to do it is just to do it.
Yeah.
Right? There is very little barrier to entry right now, right?
Yeah.
And going back to the idea of 7 billion people interacting with this model, there are 7 billion permutations of how you could use this model for different things that maybe you're the person to crack an idea that nobody else has thought of, not even the model itself, right? The idea of asking the right question to it, sometimes you get a different output based on that input. Is the same thing as that the idea you start with, right, it may not have ever been thought about, and now you've got the tools, so just go for it.
Awesome. Just do it.
Just do it.
The last section usually we do is quick fire rapid questions. So just say whatever comes to your mind. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So the first question is maybe what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
This was another conversation I had recently, where it's basically to invest in yourself, right? I think we often get stuck in a bit of a challenge thinking about the politics of the company that we're in, the problems that we're facing in our life. But if you take a step back and you think about, hey, where do I want to be in 5 years' time, right? More often than not, that step back really helps to frame what you really want to achieve in your life, right? And I would rather bet on myself than to just sort of be stuck in this sort of downward spiral, thinking bad about myself and all that. So I fully think that, taking that moment to pause and reflect and think about what is the best thing for me at this point in time and how to invest that into me is probably the best piece of advice that I've gotten.
Awesome. Second one is, what's your favorite tech tool that you use recently?
Well, Cursor comes to mind, but maybe as a bit of a different answer than Cursor, I would actually say we've been using a tool called BetterStack, which is a monitoring tool, right? And what that helps us do is that we're deploying so much infrastructure. Being able to view what's happening within our systems in a single sort of pane of glass has been quite useful for us. And it goes back to the idea of being deliberate where, yeah, we're using AI to write most of our code, but you also need monitoring systems, right, that give you that observability to make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to.
Very practical piece of software. The next one is, if you're not doing what you're doing now, like, what do you think you'd be doing?
I think I'd be a farmer, actually. I like the idea of building things and the idea of having your own little sort of space on the land, on the environment, and being able to grow your own things and build your own sheds and all that. I think that that's always attracted me. And at some point in my life, I would like to own a farm.
What do you think you would grow?
I'm very inspired by Clarkson's farm. I don't know if you watch that show, but he's grown a whole bunch of different things like wasabi, and I think in the most recent season he's started a pub and he's brewing his own beer. And I think the idea again of like, getting your hands on, right, just doing something, being able to be proud of something you've grown or built by yourself. That's something that we've kind of lost in this day and age, right? Like you don't really appreciate the hard work that goes into something until you do it yourself.
Yeah, very inspiring. Yeah. And the last question is, what are you most grateful for in life?
Well, I think my family would be, one of the top ones. I'm grateful for opportunities that I've been given. I've had, when I look back on my journey, it's really a lot of people just sort of saying, hey, this guy seems like he could do something. Let's see if he can. And they just take a gamble and give me the opportunity to learn something new. And I'm very appreciative of all the people who've been on that journey, who sort of just said like, hey, can you take this and run with it and see where you end up with?
Well, with that, thank you so much for your time, Michael. Really, really appreciate hearing not only about the insights on like B2B SaaS and AI, but also just the personal insights on pursuing opportunities. And I hope you guys become the first 3-person billion-dollar company from Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much.
And encourage everyone else in Singapore to start AI companies as well.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, tune in next time and see you guys. Bye.